Hello, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am Azranth, and it is nice to see you again. I put a lot more effort into this video, so hopefully, unlike the first one I made, it's not going to be absolutely terrible, because that first one, it was bad. I'm sorry. I just abandoned that project. We're moving on. So here is my analysis talking about some of the important parts of League of Legends that Riot has recently attempted to address in their patch. And they talked about snowballing and rubber banding in patch 8.13. I disagree in part with a lot of what they did, especially where their focus is on getting the ball rolling and making sure that you don't take off as easily with snowballing. And I hope that through the process of this, I can open the discussion up to more of the community and we can hear more voices talking in an informed and consistent way that all of us can understand each other. So let's get into it. So before we get to it, clarity of terminology is the first and most important thing. So those are the definitions. Read them. That's what I'll be talking about, is those three really important topics. So when I say them, you know what I'm talking about. All right, pause if you need to. So, snowballing as an unhealthy mechanic. First of all, not all snowballs are created equal. Okay? Snowballing is not good or bad. It is simply a mechanic that exists in a lot of games. When you go on a dungeon crawl and you collect loot in a game like Enter the Gungeon, by the way, amazing game, you should totally play it. Getting loot, that's snowballing. That is you gaining power by completing objectives within the game. When you play Diablo and you get better loot, that's snowballing. When you play StarCraft and you take control of the territory and you build stuff, well, you're gaining power. It is a mechanic that exists. It's essential to every game. It is the core of progression, being able to take on increasingly larger and more difficult tasks. That being said, there are good ways to do it, and there are just absolutely terrible ways to do it. And some symptoms of those terrible ways include things like steamrolling. If once you're ahead, there's no hope for the enemy to come back, like actually no hope, well, that's unfun. And it means the game is determined before it's over. It means that playing the game out is pointless and a waste of time, and usually a miserable waste of time. What makes snowballing, However, when it comes to things like being consistent with being better than the other players, and when it comes to things like being able to extend your lead, having those requisites, that's when snowballing is not an unhealthy mechanic. Unhealthy snowballing does not require you to extend the lead. If I play Darius, I can steamroll the other team sometimes, but I better be really far ahead and the other team better be really bad. It doesn't work if I'm just like 2 kills and 30 CS up. I can't 1v9 the game. And it's not balanced around me being able to. It's not supposed to be. But the most important thing in determining whether or not snowballing is healthy or unhealthy as a mechanic comes down to understanding the relative power between the reward you got from your last good job and how difficult the next thing that you have to tackle is going to be. That's what determines whether your snowballing is a balanced, good mechanic or if it is a frustrating, unhealthy, unrewarding mechanic. So the defender's advantage. Before I talk about the rest of this is a very important concept. Understanding that as the defender, you have an inherent advantage over the enemy means that provides a very important point for the snowball, because it means that the game can remain an even contest of skill the entire time. All it has to do is rely on the defender's advantage and how that relates to snowballing, and we're going to talk about that. That's what this entire video is about. So the 3 parts of defender's advantage that are important to recognize and understand are force concentration, Lancaster's laws and how that relates to military strategy, and comparisons between blitzkrieg and guerrilla warfare. And all of these apply to a lot of games, especially stuff like League, which is heavily strategy-based. So force concentration comes down to the idea that even if you're behind, even if you're doing poorly, if you can put all of your force at one point and turn that, it does not matter that as a whole you're weaker than the enemy because you've managed to focus down on a single narrow point of their strength, which is less than your total combined strength. In League, this is getting picks. The defenders have advantage with this because if they're defending something, they're usually not the ones who are spread out. Remember, the attacker has to spread out. They often split push during the siege and try and take on the base 4v5 with one in the side lane, or the 1-3-1. Or when you're trying to clear vision in enemy territory, somebody has to go into the vision. And if they go into vision as 5, they open themselves to getting flanked or just outplayed. So force concentration is something that heavily advantages the defender because they often get to make the decision about, oh, all 5 of us can pick off this 1 or 2 people. Making picks like that gives a heavy advantage to the defender. And then stuff like Lancaster's Law, which compares force strength and concentration, where Lancaster's laws are mathematical expressions that determine force concentration in respect to the ability to do damage to the enemy, the ability to inhibit or cripple the enemy, and also describes that it does not simply apply to your ability to kill the enemy, but also your ability to negate the enemy killing you. It means that if you can cripple the enemy, that's just as good as killing them. If you render them useless, it does not matter because they might as well not be there. They're just a liability to their team at that point. Which is why it's not just about doing damage. It's why carries are not simply reliant on doing damage. Things like tanks, they're carries. Because in the late game, the utility and durability that they provide allows you to negate the damage that the other team's hyper carries, damage dealing carries, would do. That's why enchanters should be considered carries, because they extend the lives and increase the damage of those who already do damage. It's not just about doing it yourself. And then comparing Blitzkrieg and Guerrilla Warfare. Blitzkrieg is what's going on for the team with the advantage. Guerrilla Warfare is what's going on for the team who's behind. The team who's behind has to rely on the defender's advantage and superior vision and things like that the enemy must take risks and come to them. They have to take advantage of their environment. The defense has to play smart, essentially, in order to compensate for earlier mistakes or inferior skill. As opposed to Blitzkrieg, which is German for lightning war, by the way. Fun fact. But that refers to the advantaged team, the attacker. They have to overwhelm the enemy, or else they're going to stall, they're going to fall behind. And the game is all about balancing these two concepts between Blitzkrieg and Guerrilla Warfare. Okay, so snowballing as a healthy mechanic does a few important things for us. It paces the game. Like, first and foremost, that's what it does. It paces the game. It also provides the framework that allows us to develop strategy. It allows for a meta to emerge because it provides the consistency that gives us expectations. It allows us to make predictions. It allows me to say, okay, I happen to know that this marksman is weak now, but they'll probably be strong later, so here's how I should react to that and what I should do and what I should aim for. Here are my goals, and adapt that on the fly. It allows the game to be unique from session to session, and it opens up the game to be varying. It raises the variance of the game without devaluing skill. It does not necessarily increase the RNG of the game. It doesn't make the game any more coin flip. It doesn't negate your skill. In fact, it rewards it. So it simultaneously makes the game more fun, diverse, while also making the game more predictable and rewarding. Okay, so when we talk about this, I'm going to give you a quick analogy. We'll talk about layered objectives that come one after the other. And to talk about this, we're going to use the brick game. The brick game is a very simple game, involves only 2 people, and you guys can read. So the idea is I roll a die, you roll a die, and then whoever rolled higher gets to take a brick out of the enemy pile. It doesn't have to be the top brick, but it's going to be much harder for me to remove the bottom brick than the top brick. Very simple concept. And every brick that I remove makes it easier to take off the next one. That is snowballing at its core. That taking one objective becomes easier after I've taken the last objective. And they should increase consistently to the amount of effort I had to put forth to do the previous one. I'm removing one brick. Well, my next task gets one brick easier. But if I want to add to the brick game and make it more interesting, well, I have all kinds of options. What if I want to increase its scale? What if I decide that not 10 bricks, I want thousands of bricks? Well, that could take a while if I was to just pick up and put down 1,000 bricks, you know. I'm all for the Hans and Franz picks things up and puts them down, but that's not fun. So I get my cranes, and a crane has a counterbalance. So what if I use the bricks that I pick up as my counterbalance for my crane, and now my crane can lift more, and every single time I pick up bricks, I can now pick up more bricks the next time. And now it's a race to see who can pick up more bricks. Okay, awesome. I've now added something where previous success contributes to the next level of success. I've scaled up successfully, and I've made something that so long as I continue scaling, so long as I can increase the scale of the game, I can make the game larger, I can add more bricks, and I know that this system will reliably keep pace. Because the more bricks there are, well, the faster and more bricks I'm able to pick up at once. This is ignoring the physics, of course, that cranes have a limited size on their buckets and how many things they can actually fit as far as volume goes, but just please accept it for the simplicity of the analogy. But there's a fine line here when it comes to balancing these bricks. There's an escalation of power in this case. The difficulty of the objective of being able to pick up more bricks has absolutely nothing to do with how much ease I gain in picking up bricks from success to success. It's poorly balanced snowballing. It is what I talked about earlier when I said steamrolling. What that comes from is there's an exponential growth of advantage given from success, but no growth in difficulty of the objective. Well, that makes for an unfun game. It makes the game pointless. It means that the game very quickly stops being about skill, how good am I at operating the crane, and just becomes brute force that the game was already determined because I got an early lead and I'm so far ahead on that exponential curve that there's no way you'll ever catch up. So the brick game, if I want to scale it up in this particular way, would be unfun. This example of the cranes and using them as a counterbalance is what it's like when a game has poorly balanced snowballing. So better than bricks, let's talk about the house game. The house game is a more complicated game, and we're going to use the bricks from the last one, and we're going to build a bunch of buildings. They're like little fortresses. You guys can read. Inside the fortresses are tools and all kinds of equipment. And the idea is that starting with nothing, or very little, you break into the first house, and you get what's inside, and you use it to break into the next. And the next house is more difficult, meaning that the tools of the previous houses are requisite to get into the next one, or else you're going to waste a whole bunch of time using inferior tools. And because it's a race, if you're wasting time, you'll lose. Now you actually get to make decisions. Now your game is better because you can make choices, because it accentuates different levels of skill. And in addition to adding strategy, you've made it so that you have a separate reward mechanic and difficulty mechanic that you can adjust independently such that you can assure your game is balanced without ending up in that vicious cycle of exponential growth. So, based on what we know, what we've learned from the house game and the brick game, we know that we cannot have our objectives fail to scale in difficulty. They have to get harder over time. And they should probably operate independently of each other in order to avoid recursive exponential feedback. Let's keep going. Improving the house game. What can we do to make the house game better? Well, we can add interactivity between the people, such as with traps, as mentioned in the second bullet. We can make some of the houses, fought over between the enemies, or the two competitors, so that I have to make choices about, is it worth it to me? Well, no, I have better options on my buildings, but how worth is it to set you back? Because you want it. I get to make decisions like that. I get to take into consideration the power of the enemy. I've taken my very symmetrical race and I've opened up some asymmetrical features where I'm not the only person. But I have not corrupted the core of my game's snowballing and balance by doing so. I've maintained these distinctions of progression and growth without contaminating it through these additional mechanics, because all of these additional mechanics are based on the same original premise, the core of the game. And then I can do things like investing with pieces of some amazing tool, where I have to take risks and I have to fight and I have to make sure I get into those houses. I have to make decisions about how much power do I need to build up before it's enough power that I'm willing to just sit down and dig through some houses and accept that for a period of time I'm going to experience a lull in growth. I won't be making any progress, but I'll be gaining something. It's an investment in time. I'm taking a risk. How much safety cushion am I going to build up before I take that risk? Am I going to waste time overcompensating for the risk? But even here, I have not corrupted the core idea of the game. It's what the house game teaches us. It's what we talked about. In a perfect game, some objectives and milestones are simply impossible without appropriate gear. I cannot get into the big final house at the end in a reasonable amount of time unless I've done some of the other buildings and got tools from them. Also, that system has diminishing returns. Sure, the amazing tools that I get 4 buildings in could demolish some of the initial buildings that I opted out of, but why would I bother going to get them? They have inferior tools that aren't useful to me anymore. By having this diminishing return, this escalating difficulty, and the difficulty being proportional to the reward, I've built in diminishing return to my system. And then everything is about proportion to the prior reward and to the upcoming difficulty. I invest time now, I get something out of it, and then I use that going forward to either help myself or hinder my enemy. I mean, honestly, throw some, just open up some Flash or HTML5, and this could be a game. This is, at its core, the idea behind making a fun or balanced game that is competitive in a way that is reasonable and predictable. But League doesn't live up to these expectations. Before we continue, where I really get into the meat of the video, I need to go over a few things. First of all, everything I'm about to say is based on these principles, these fundamentals that I spent the entire part of this video so far covering when I talked about the house game and the brick game. If you have something in there that you think, I missed, or I ignored, I overlooked, or I'm simply wrong about, please make it clear that you think one of my premises is flawed. I feel like my conclusions are pretty solid. And if you think my premises are flawed, that I'm missing some important detail, I overlooked something, I just made a wrong assumption, please, in the comments section, go ahead. But make it clear what you're talking about. Make it clear in what context. What I said doesn't make sense. Make it clear what I'm missing out on. Don't just attack the conclusion because the premises are wrong without pointing out which premises are wrong and why. Okay. Ascending difficulty of objectives. The first thing we talked about, that was what was wrong with the brick game. It's what's wrong with League right now. Baron and towers just simply aren't hard enough. They do nothing. They're not a threat. They don't provide They don't provide sufficient advantage to the defender. Tower diving is a joke post 5 for most champions. If you have any reasonable amount of damage or any CC whatsoever, you can just kill anyone under tower. Just shove in the wave and murder them. Because the tower offers no protection of any kind. There should be a serious investment and reward for tower diving. But right now, the rewards are kept in a weird, hard to balance place because taking those objectives are so easy. It's creating a problem of that recursive feedback loop, where the smallest advantage in lane leads to just crushing the enemy. And it means that if you went 1 and 2, you're gonna be 1 and 8. And there's nothing you can do about it. Because there is not a maintaining level between the next difficulty and the prior reward. Being able to dive the tower is dependent on having done something beforehand. I did not get enough of a reward from my lane to be able to dive. Well, right now, 1 kill advantage is enough to be able to dive, which is ridiculous because of how large the reward is for diving. And it's not based on the numbers of the game, that's just based on pressure. It's based on strategy. That's just the reality, and there's nothing Riot can reasonably do to tweak numbers to fix that. But they can tweak numbers to adjust how reasonable it is to dive. And then take Baron, for example. Baron doesn't do any damage. It's not a threat to the team attempting it, which means that if the team can win the 5v5 at all, like even just a tiny bit, Baron is a non-factor that just doesn't contribute to the disadvantaged team winning. It just doesn't do enough. By the time 20 minutes rolls around, you do not have to have any kind of significant lead to be able to take Baron. You just need a lead, period. It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be controlling, you don't have to have done anything with your lead previously. If you have any lead whatsoever, Baron just belongs to you and the game ends. And that is why laning phase determines the result of the game, is because there is no intermediary steps where the advantaged team has to continue to display superior skill. Defender's advantage in the siege. This is what levels out the playing field in skill. We very clearly understand that if I have more gold, I have more towers, I took more things, I'm more powerful. But what advantage would the defender have with less gold, less tower, less map? Well, first of all, having less map means that they get to be denser on the map that they have. It means that they have shorter routes between the rotations, and they can just run around inside their base to get from inhib tower to inhib tower if they need to. They control the jungle from safe positions, and they probably have more information, if they're not bad, because they retreat through their own vision line, whereas the enemy has to venture forward into their vision line. And any time the enemy spends trying to negate these advantages of the defender is time that the defenders are getting free stall without any risk or effort on their part. The purpose of the lead is not to guarantee victory in these situations like the siege, but rather to level out the playing field of what would otherwise be impossible. If I want to take a tier 2 and both of us have the same amount of power and gold and we're playing similar champions that have similar power levels at this point in the game, I'm basically wasting my time beating my face on a brick wall. Or that's how it should be. Because that's reasonable. In lane phase, yeah, it makes sense that a small advantage is what translates to me being able to take the tower, because otherwise the lane phase would never end. Because we just split the wave 50-50 forever, and people would just be annoyed and it'd be a farm fest AFK forever for 20 minutes. Nobody would enjoy that. But the difficulty has to ascend back as the towers go. It has to be a massive jump from tier 1 to tier 2 to make it so that it is actually a noticeable, like, wow, this is a thing that requires me to be in the lead to be able to take. The same amount of advantage at 10 minutes should not net you the same amount of reward at 20 minutes. If I do good here if I have a 1,500 gold advantage at 10 minutes, and I do something good with that, if I still only have a 1,500 gold advantage 10 minutes later, I should not be continuing to hold that lead. Defenders outside the siege. These things apply elsewhere. When clearing vision, the enemy has to walk into where you have control. If I want to go and get control of their jungle, I have to take the risk of walking into their jungle. And if I want someone to come with me to keep me safe, I have to give up pressure elsewhere on the map. I have to disadvantage and handicap myself in order to do something like that. When you're taking Baron, Baron should, but does not, but it should debuff and harm you to the point where the team fight afterwards is going to be rough if you're not in the lead. Your tanks have to be able to win the fight even with only 2/3 of their health and 3/4 of their resists. They have to be able to compensate for losing tons of stats to the Baron. You have to be able to compensate for your smite being off cooldown and all your vision being expended in order to get control of the jungle, and maybe being down a few ults because you had to spend them, zoning the enemy off and being able to take this. Basically, the Baron should be consuming your resources, that way you can't spend them on winning the team fight. It levels out the playing field in a way that makes it about skill, not just being about, I have more damage in my pocket in my items. As opposed to Dragon, though. The Dragon gives less reward than Baron, and rightfully so, because it poses little solo threat, because its value is based on basically each team being even when they go to contest it, and it's whoever is ahead gets the Dragon. Or rather, whoever's ahead gets to make the decision about who gets the Dragon. Whether they want to trade it with some play top, or they want to just take it themselves. Why stalling is recovering. So this is what I was talking about earlier over here when I talked about advantage in the siege. I talked about keeping that gold advantage the same. Stalling is recovering. Here I use much larger and much more arbitrary numbers because I was getting ahead of myself. But in this case, Team 1 is far ahead and Team 2 is way behind. This means that if Team 2 is able to defend the contestable objectives, i.e. the objectives where the defender's advantage is equal to the gold advantage of the enemy team, well, it means that Team 2 is the better team. Even if they are down 5k gold, if they have a fight that is on their home turf, is in a favorable way that they're able to win, Team 2 earned that victory. It means that if, Team 1 has, let's pick an arbitrary number. Let's say they have 5 small victories, whatever they are. They have 5 objectives. They've won 5 things. And Team 2 has won none of them. Well, if Team 2, starts winning these, starts preventing Team 1 from taking more, well, it means that they've won something along the way. Each of those preventing is an additional victory on their side, and eventually it'll be back to 5 victories and 5 victories, and the team should be roughly even. Here, Team 1 is double the power of Team 2, and it kind of implies that it had a little bit more to do with luck than superior skill. Stalling, the sequel. But if the game progresses and the lead isn't extended, and it becomes like 15k to 10k, I missed a 0. Anyway, it's still a big margin, but notice how it's gone from twice as much to barely 50% more. Team 1 had what they needed to take the next objective back when they had a 5k gold advantage over them, when they were double their power, but now they don't have it anymore. They no longer have the amount of extra strength they need to force objectives. It means that Team 2 has successfully negated their lead. It means that here, the snowballing is balanced. It means that I've been allowed to take my effort and put it towards hindering you, and by successfully hindering you, I've gained a victory. I've handicapped the enemy. Just like if I break into a house. In the house game, there's a trap inside. I use the trap to, damage you or harm you or slow you down or destroy your tools whenever you go to take on the next challenge. Even if I have not progressed myself in gaining strength for myself, I've successfully handicapped you. I've done something good, which means I should be rewarded for it. That's why stalling should be considered losing for the winning team. Revenge of the stalling. The issue, however, comes when it's time to reverse the advantages. So back in that example, it's still 15k to 10k. They're still down 5,000 gold. But Team 1 no longer has what they need to force the next objective. It means either everybody sits around waiting for something like Baron to respawn, which is exactly why things like Baron respawn, or Team 2 needs to do something before that happens to regain control themselves and to begin to get the snowball rolling. And this is where it comes down to skill. Team 2 must prove that not only were they able to negate them, but we are better. We are able to overcome this small disadvantage in gold on an even playing field, no defender's advantage, and kill the enemy and get back in the game. Bounties are a big part of this, and Riot's been relying on them pretty heavily. In fact, they've recently buffed them in patch 8.13. And I have a problem with this because of rubber banding and coin flip games. So I'm going to remind you real quick when we talked about rubber banding, if you need to, go back and look what that is. But also when we talked about this case in the why stalling is recovering, remember how I said just pick a number of victories, 5. Consider those victories instances where Team 1 was superior in skill or knowledge to Team 2. Just cases where Team 1 was better than Team 2. And then every time Team 2 recovered one of those victories, Team 2 was better than Team 1. So think of them like that. In a game where you win, theoretically, you should have more instances of being a better player, right? Well, the issue with bounties is that sometimes bounties don't really encourage that. They're a useful mechanic, sure. They end the stall and they can act to do well that when the enemy makes a mistake, it's like, boom, brakes are on, it's time for me to mount a comeback. They throw the brakes on. The problem is that sometimes it's less like resistance and it's more like hitting a wall at 60 miles an hour. The enemy team is up 18 kills and it's a gold 2 clown fiesta. Nobody's taking any objectives, it's just tons of kills, and somebody just makes a mistake. Even if Team 1 in this case is up like 20 demonstrations of superior skill, boom, all of it has hit the brick wall and it comes to a stop because of bounties. And the more demonstrations of skill that they've got over the enemy, well, the more crippling and painful that is when they do hit the wall. It really sucks. And it's also really deceptive because you don't expect the enemy to get so much from one mistake on your part. Because sometimes it is just that. Sometimes it is you just made a clumsy mistake. Even if you are the better team of better players, everybody makes mistakes. Even Faker says it. A lot of pros say, I'm only human. Actually, it's not Faker. It's some other person, like GDQ. Is that who it is? I'm only human. I can't hit every shot. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so the issue is that bounties don't really start the comeback after the enemy snowball has stopped. Instead, it's that at some point when you finally beat them, you just throw it in reverse. Now, if any of you have ever thrown a car in reverse at full speed, you know why this is bad. Because what happens is a painful, fiery wreck in which nobody is happy. Gray screen simulator. So death timers are actually the better mechanic on the comeback, that transition from I've stalled out the game and we're even to I'm now in the lead. That's what death timers are for. It doesn't matter if you're behind, if the enemy's just dead. That's what forcing that one fight, just getting a team fight, catching the enemy, making a pick, that's what that's all about. It's about someone on your team taking the initiative to just have a simple demonstration of I'm the better player, I made a pick, I did a good thing, now we're in the lead. We didn't need any help or advantage from, the innate condition of the game. We just beat you. We're in the lead now. Just like at the beginning of the game, the Team 1 beat Team 2. They just got the lead. It's just at different times. Using this window after killing the enemy on a botch play is what provides you the opportunity for the losing team to become the winning team. However, this should not happen when the losing team is more than a certain amount behind. It just shouldn't. I should not be able, with a single good play, to negate 5 previous bad plays. For every single terrible play that I made in order to dig myself into a 5,000 gold deficit, I should require another 5 plays to dig myself back out. That's what it should take. And that's what results in coin flip games that aren't reliant on skill. Let's say, we had Team 1 is the better team, Team 2 is the worst team. Team 1 is consistently beating Team 2. Like, they have 20 demonstrations of superior skill, and then they screw up twice in a row, and all of a sudden, the playing field is back to even. Now, let's say from this point on, they have the same number of demonstrations of good skill, and eventually Team Team 2 just clutches it out at the very end with one good play and wins it. Well, let's say in the end, it's 25 good instances of them being the better team, and they lost to another team that only had 7 instances of being the better team. That's not fun. It's not good game design. It's why things like death timers are important as opposed to bounties. It's why bounties need to take a back seat, and mechanics other than sitting in your fountain not being able to do anything need to exist. It's why waves need to be difficult to clear. Because if you just can clear waves instantly, then you're not able to do things like negate members of the enemy team. Rubber band. So here's where I'm going to get, a little off. And I'm just going to talk about instances where you can see these mechanics at work behind the scenes and how they used to be. So let's take something like top lane. Why is top lane the meta that it is? Well, it's because top lane's conditions in the early game are ideal to suit a champion that when it comes down to the game being even, when it comes down to this thing is stalled out and you can defend 4v5, and no one's able to force an objective, top laners are able to take that vacuum and produce pressure. They're able to do things like split push or 1v1. That's why fighters like Fiora or things like Nasus all go top. And you can see over time how Riot has shifted their philosophy about these things and changed their design up and progressively taken steps to alter how this rubber banding is treated and affected in the game. Go back and look through changes to Nasus, Renekton, Darius, what the update to Irelia did. Now Irelia is somehow both an early and a late game champion. That you just get in a team fight and 5v5. There's no instance where being behind or being even really has a relevant impact on what you're supposed to do. On one hand, it speeds up the games, certainly, because it makes them more volatile, but on the other, it takes some of the skill, the fun, and the predictability out of the game. And as we said earlier, there's a point where being able to formulate expectations about the enemy and act in accordance is the core to strategy. So there are things that eliminate strategy from the game. What is the strategy you use to retaliate to something like Camille, where she's a lane bully and she has presence and mobility so you can't gank her, but also come late game she has super long range engage, stuns, immunity, silences, things that allow her to dive really well. She pins down an enemy and can make picks. It's like that champion kind of has it all that you could want except for ranged DPS. But who cares if you're really that much of a Swiss Army knife or Switch Army knives? Get it? Because she has sword legs. It's a good joke. Don't judge me. Alright. And then there's other cases. Top lane's not the only one. Bot lane hyper carries are for when the game goes late, we hit 6 items, it's like, well, nobody forced an objective, now it's just a clown fiesta 5v5. And the better carry wins. Supports are great because with minimum gold, they're able to slap a band-aid over their team's hemorrhaging. They don't need to be ahead to be effective. They're effective no matter what, which means that they can be the thing that turns their team around. They can be the thing that's like, alright, stop, we're making a comeback. Aggressive characters like in jungle, and also bruisers in top. It's not just, top, bottom, mid, support, it's not just that. It's everywhere. It's just that primarily these play in certain roles. Like jungle typically was an aggressive champion that ganked well and was able to get the ball rolling in the first place. And assassins were popular in mid lane because they had access to the map and they're what would keep the enemy on the back foot and kick them while they're down. These categories of characters have their own legitimate uses based on these things, in relation to how the game is progressing and the snowballing of the game. So you can see all these things at work behind the scenes. I'm not just, mumbling and saying things I don't know what I'm talking about. Look at the game. You can see it. They're all there. Now, even as much as I think that these things would be good, there would still be things that people complain about. And I don't think that these are so much of a problem.
but people would complain about them nonetheless. Such as if I pick a team comp that just like once we're in the stall, we have no way to get out of it, that game's going to 50 minutes. Like, you have nothing you can do to end that game sooner. You just have to wait for your carry to scale. If you pick a top laner that's not able to split push, and you pick a mid laner that isn't able to like do some flashy play, like it's not something that can assist in the pick or bursting someone out once you catch them. They're just something really safe and consistent. Then like, well, you kind of put yourself in a situation where you're like, all right, we're not losing, but we can't do anything to advance our winning either. So people would complain about that there would be certain team comps that once you hit the stall, you have no choice but to go late. There are certain game conditions that would highly emphasize one character type and minimize others, such as if you were really far ahead, it would kind of not matter if you were the support or the ADC, because you'd be kind of useless, because things that do well with the lead, something like an assassin, or like imagine if Elise wasn't a steaming pile of crap, like Elise would just run away with the lead, and she'd just murder everyone, and it would be Elise's chance to be in the spotlight. And then there are the other games where it goes late, and the ADC is literally the only important person on the team, and it's basically a 1v1 with 8 spectators. And if the game is fixed, it would restore those distinctions. That's what it would do. And people would complain about the distinctions, because, people would be mad that their champion that smashed lane early because of their kit also wasn't able to be useful late game. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. But, yeah. And also, bad choices would be as punishing as bad mechanics. A lack of coordination or knowledge can cost you the game against drastically inferior players. Even if it's why challenger players can pick up a champion for the first time and just go murder people in bronze. It's just because they know more. And this would definitely make that more important, because it would be less about the 5v5 death ball. But I think that's a good thing. I personally have no problems with any of these, but I guarantee you people would complain nonetheless. So, thank you very much. Thank you for watching. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to know what you have to say. But yeah, these are some really important points that I think people need to talk about. I think people need to realize that the problems in the game are really not so complicated and unaddressable as you may be led to believe. That there really is a common language and understanding that we can all have and agree on when it comes to things like looking at the game and understanding them, when it comes to things like thinking about other game concepts just in the most simple and basic of terms without all the added complications. Talking about why bounties are good and why they can also be dangerous. Talking about, should stalling really reward the players as much as it does, or should it reward them more? Talking about how much is really a reasonable reward and a reasonable challenge to take objectives. Realizing that the defending team should be on an even footing with the attacking team, and it should be about skill. That defender's advantage is what matches with the gold lead, and that those two things are the platforms that hold you up to be able to take an even skill matchup. So I believe, if you want, I can make this PowerPoint public as well, but that's all I have to say on the matter, I believe. So once again, thank you for coming. My name was Azaranth, and I'll see you on the Rift. Thank you. Have a good time.